Hi, thanks for joining us at the Fantasy Ball Profits. My name is Rob Skudovic. So today we're going to do a video on the best dynasty or keeper wide receivers heading into the 2018 season. We're going to do a top 30 wide receivers that we currently have them listed right now. A few things to consider as you watch the video. One, we're going to talk about the age of the receivers. Well, as we do, um, it may be confusing if you go online now. The ages we refer to may not be their current age. What we did is we looked ahead to the start of this season and looked at what their age is going to be at the start of the season or a good portion of the season. So if you look up and find that a wide receiver is 24, but we called him 25, probably because he's having a birthday maybe in August or early September. So these are the ages that they're going to be during this football season. Also, a thing you need to consider is take this information. You got to put in the context of your league and your scoring system. Every scoring system is different. That's going to affect the rankings. A great example of that is Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry hasn't been a great wide receiver in standard leagues. He only averages about 6 TDs per year, barely over 1,000 yards. But he's been a PPR giant, averaging 105 catches the last 3 years. So you have to take this information, put in the context of your league and your scoring system. When you look at, for example, consideration, we're not just looking at the best wide receivers heading into 2018. We'll do a video later on, look at our actual wide receiver rankings. This is concerning dynasty and keeper leagues. So we're projecting ahead, not just this year, but 4 or 5 years down the road, where we see these guys in terms of their value. If it's simply a matter of who's the best wide receiver going into the 2018 season, the number one wide receiver, hands down, beyond a shadow of a doubt, will be Antonio Brown. He is the best wide receiver out there. But at age 30, maybe he doesn't have as much dynasty value as, let's say, Juju Smith-Schuster, who's only 21. So we have to consider all that in our rankings, just see how we kind of work that out. Then the other thing you need to consider right now is this is our rankings. They sit today here in early April. Obviously, the NFL draft hasn't taken place yet, and when that happens, that's going to change a lot of things. Camps will begin to start. We'll hear about injury recoveries. For example, things like Andrew Luck, is he going to recover? That's going to affect the value of T.Y. Hilton. So this is where we sit here in early April. There'll be adjustments as we get closer to the start of the season. So let's get into our first wide receiver today. So as we look at our top 30, the number one wide receiver I have right now in terms of dynasty leagues and keeper leagues, this may surprise you, but the number one guy I have is DeAndre Hopkins. Now, for some of you, that may shock you a bit, but hear me out on this one, why I think he's the number one dynasty wide receiver to have right now. One, he's very talented, he's very athletic, and he's still young at the age of 26. As far as off the field issues go, he has no glaring character issues, at least not that we can see at this point of his career. He's known to have a great work ethic. But I want to break down some numbers for you a little bit deeper and know why I think he would be the number one dynasty wide receiver to have at this point. If you look at 2 of the last 4 seasons, he's done really well in terms of touchdowns. He had 11 one season, 13 the other. He's averaged 1,275 yards the last 4 seasons. He's got good size, like we mentioned, very athletic. His resume includes a season where he had 111 catches. He's had yardage totals in the last 3 of the last 4 years of 1,210, 1,521, 1,378. So his yardage totals have been good. But here's the thing that I think sometimes can be lost in the whole conversation with DeAndre Hopkins. And the one thing that's really keeping him from having Odell Beckham or Antonio Brown type numbers, it's really the subpar quarterbacks that he's had to play with through the years. I want you to consider this when you think about how talented this wide receiver is. Back in 2013, he had Matt Schaub for 8 games throwing the ball. He had Case Keenum for 8 games. Now, I want to stop right there. We talk about Case Keenum, okay? Case Keenum had a really good year. I'm a Vikings fan. Obviously, I live in Minnesota. He had a great year last year. But prior to last year, Case Keenum was not a good quarterback. He struggled greatly. In 2014, he had Ryan Fitzpatrick for 12 games, Ryan Mallett for 2, and Case Keenum for 2. In 2015, that was the year that his league-leading 111 catches, his 1,521 yards and 13 TDs. So that year that he had that kind of record-breaking year for him. Here's who he had at quarterback. He had Brian Hoyer for 9, Ryan Mallett for 4, TJ Yates for 2, and Brandon Weeden for 1. In 2016, he had Brock Osweiler for 14 games and Tom Savage for 2. And last year, I had Tom Savage for 7 games. Deshaun Watson, who, by the way, I think is going to be a very good quarterback, but Deshaun was only his quarterback for 6 games, and he had TJ Yates for 3 games. So here's what this guy has. He needs just an average quarterback to put up good numbers. Well, he should get that and much more now that Watson's taken over and he's going to be a healthy quarterback. If you look at the weeks that Watson and him were playing together when they were quarterback, Hopkins averaged during that 6-game stretch 6 catches per game for 92 yards and 1 touchdown per game that he was averaging. Of course, you project those numbers out over 16 games. That would have turned out to be 96 catches, 72 in terms of yards, and 16 TDs. Those were kind of his average numbers during the time that Watson was the quarterback there. But I think those numbers could be even better. One, Watson's still learning the game as a young quarterback. They're still building rapport. I think he's got many, many great years ahead. I think the guy, in terms of like, if I could have a guy right now as my dynasty wide receiver, it would be DeAndre Hopkins. Number 2 guy on there is Odell Beckham. Some people think he should be number 1. Some of you guys like him, you hate him, whatever. The only thing that's bigger than this guy's talent is probably the drama that he brings at this point. With that said, whatever you may think of Odell Beckham, whether you love him, whether you hate him, what is undeniable, he has an amazing talent. He's got phenomenal hands, maybe the best in the league, and maybe the best hands of all time. Now, if you look at his first 4 seasons in the league, and if you look at his per game average statistically, and you project that over 16 games, what you find is he was averaging 107 catches per season, 1,506 yards with 13 TDs. He's been amazing, and he's still very young at 25. And those numbers could easily put him at number 1. Now, here are some of the concerns I have and why I bumped him below DeAndre Hopkins. It really, for me, comes down to off-the-field trouble at this point. A lot of videos have surfaced, a lot of issues going along, there's a lot of drama that he brings. And what's happening right now, that New York has even actually talked about trading him away. Now, it would appear that at this point they're not going to trade him away. What they're asking, what teams are willing to pay, it's just not going to work out. But the fact that the team is talking about trading their number 1 wide receiver speaks volumes of how they're getting tired of some of his off-field antics. Coach Sherman had said he's made it very clear that he wants no distractions on the team. In fact, the Giants owners expressed frustration with Odell Beckham. Usually players like this that have a lot of issues like that, unless they can begin to sort that out and get these off-the-field issues straightened out, eventually catches up to their on-field performance. It just happens time and time again. No matter how talented this guy is, if he can't get those things worked out, it's going to start to affect him. Another concern I have, and this is going to seem strange for a lot of you, is that his statistics are great. He's been phenomenal. He's fun to watch. But he relies statistically on so many spectacular catches. Now, why is that an issue, right? Like, you think it would be wonderful. This guy goes out and makes circus catch after circus catch. It's hard to maintain that production long term. One of those sort of catches going over the middle, it takes really takes its toll on the body. The body takes a beating. And we've actually seen that he's struggling to stay healthy at times. He's not a big wide receiver, and I don't think he's built to take that sort of punishment. Now, if you take a guy like Odell Beckham and you compare him to Antonio Brown, now Antonio Brown makes circus catches too. He's a phenomenal athlete also. But Brown runs great routes and gets great separation, so his numbers aren't statistically dependent on him always having to beat the double team and make a phenomenal catch. Now, that may not even be Odell Beckham's fault. That could be the offense, could be the offense corner, it could be the play of Eli Manning. But the bottom line is, I do find it a bit concerning that he struggles at times with that. Another concern I have for him, and once again, I love this guy. I think he's phenomenal. But one concern, he's actually had declining stats since the first year he came in the league. Now, it would appear that's not the case. If you look at his stats across the board, they look pretty similar, but there's a few things you need to consider when you look at that. Okay, first of all, that first year he had a phenomenal year, but he only played in 12 games. So those statistics actually are a lot better than any other year that he had. He did that in just 12 games. And then you look at his second year, 2015, he had more catches and TDs and yards than he did in his previous year. But if you look at his average statistical breakdown per game, his number is actually a bit lower. Then he follows that up in 2016. He actually had less yards and TDs, even though he played one more game than he had the year before. And then last year, of course, he got injured. He's a guy that maybe at this point people will be scared away from. I doubt it. People maybe will let him slip a little bit because of his drama. There are risks, obviously, because of his off-the-field issues. With that said, Odell Beckham is a phenomenal talent. He's a guy that you can't pass up. He's my number 2 dynasty wide receiver. Number 3 guy I have out there is Mike Evans. Now, if you look at the first 4 years of his career, he's averaged over 1,000 yards per season. The only other wide receiver in the NFL to do that at this point is A.J. Green. They're the only 2 wide receivers that have that honor of the first 4 years in the league having over 1,000 yards of receiving. Twice he's broken double-digit touchdowns where he's had 12. And at 25, he's actually a little bit younger than Odell Beckham if you look at their birth dates. Another thing that I like about this guy is that the Bucs just signed him a long-term deal. That speaks volumes of what they see in him, what they like, and they want to build their team around him. Another thing that I like about him in terms of a dynasty wide receiver goes, the one thing as these players get older, the first thing that usually tends to go is they begin to lose a step. They lose some of that quickness. Now, if you're an offensive lineman or other positions, maybe not so much of a big deal. But if you're a wide receiver, you're begin to lose a step. That is huge. They rely, obviously, wide receivers rely so heavy on that. I want to take, for example, Larry Fitzgerald. Let's look at him. In the last few years, Larry Fitzgerald has lost a step. His yards per catch are definitely down, but at 6'3", he's still a very effective wide receiver. In fact, he's averaging 108 catches the last 3 years, that bodes well for Mike Evans because Mike Evans is 6'5", so even if he loses a step, that big body will allow him to continue to be a good possession receiver. He'll get more than his share of targets in the red zone. Another thing I enjoy about him and I look forward is his quarterback Winston is very young. He'll be around together. This pair, they should be paired up for many years to come. And Winston has shown he loves to look Mike Evans' way. In fact, if you look at 2016, Mike Evans led all receivers with 173 targets. He's a great young possession receiver with a bright future in the NFL. I love Mike Evans. Let's get to our number 5 guy here. Well, our number 5 guy is Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown at age 30. That's why he bumped him down a little bit, is because he's not old, but he's not young anymore. But Antonio Brown is really the gold standard of wide receivers. He is the best wide out there, hands down. But it is a dynasty conversation that we are having. And so you have to consider the fact that he's 30 and bump him down a bit. I still see maybe 2, 3, 4 good years in him before we'll see a decline. With that said, he does lose value because some of these other wide receivers could have double those amount of years left in the league where they'll be productive. He's a guy who 5 consecutive seasons has been over 100 catches per season, averaging 1,570 yards per season. This guy has been phenomenal, but because of his age at 30, he's not nearly as young as some of these other wide receivers we're going to talk about, so we did bump him down a little bit there. So number 6 for me is Julio Jones. Julio Jones has broken over 1,400 yards receiving the last 4 years. Between the years 2013 and 2015, he averaged 7.8 catches per game. Now, if you take that and you project that over 16 games, if he was healthy, okay, that projects out to be averaging 125 catches per season. In 2015, he had 136 catches and 1,871 yards. He's very good. Is there any drawbacks with Julio Jones? Well, there are actually. For whatever reason, he's not a big TD guy. In his career, he's only broken double-digit touchdowns 1 time. He's actually averaging 5.5 TDs per season, which is strange when you consider the fact this guy is 6'3", 220 pounds. He has a big frame. Another concern, it's not a big concern, but he's not young anymore. He's 29, so maybe he has still 4 to 5 good years in him, but definitely not. He's not going to be top 5 for me. I'm going to put him at number 6 because of his age. Number 7 is Juju Smith-Schuster. Obviously, he's only been in the league 1 year. Statistics may not blow you away, but what is phenomenal about this guy is he's still only 21 years old. He adjusted very quickly to the NFL. Everything points to him having an amazing future there. If you look at last year, he got better and better as the year went on. In fact, during the second half of last year, he had 3 games where he had receiving yard totals of 193, 114, and 143. He finished the year with 917 yards and 7 TDs in 13 games. Now, I say 13 games. If you actually click on the statistics, it says 14. But in one of those games, he left very, very early in the first quarter. So really, he only played in 13 games, put up some great numbers. You project those numbers out for a full 16-game season, he would have had 1,128 yards and 9 TDs. And this is for a guy that wasn't supposed to be nothing more than the number 3 wide receiver option, and really the number 4 receiving option in terms of targets behind Brown, Bell, and Bryant at this point. Look at the first few weeks, he didn't get a ton of volume. Most thought that Matavius Bryant was going to be the guy to watch this year as he kind of came back. Well, it didn't take for long for the Steelers to figure out that Juju was the better player. The moment he arrived at camp, the coaches loved this guy. And what else I think bodes really well for him moving forward is he has Antonio Bryant on the field with him. And Antonio Bryant's going to take a lot of attention away. Defenses are going to obviously put their best corner on Antonio Bryant. He's going to see the double team. Safety's going to sneak over for Antonio Bryant. And that should leave Juju Smith-Schuster often in one-on-one coverage. So that's huge. This kid has got a bright future in the NFL. Number 8 for me is Amari Cooper. Now, Amari Cooper, age 24. Had nice statistical progression between years 1 and year 2. He looked like he's progressing nicely, and he fell off last year. So why is that? Is that a concern? How do we figure that out? How do we factor in that drop off in numbers? Well, for me, I'm not really that concerned. If you look at what happened, was injuries greatly contributed to his off year. He had a concussion, lingering ankle injuries. He only played 12 games. Often when he did play, he was banged up. He wasn't 100%. Also, you have to figure the fact that not only was he banged up and hurt, but Carr was hurt a lot last year. He was injured, ineffective. Now you add Coach Gruden there, and Gruden's going to find ways to get him involved in the offense. He's going to recover just nicely this year. He'll be just fine. And then last year, he had a huge game that kind of reminds us all of what kind of talent this guy has. When he played Kansas City, and he went for 11 catches for 210 yards and a TD. He also finished the last 2 games of the season. He had one 100-yard game and 2 touchdowns. For the year, he finished with 7 TDs, and that's actually a pretty good number if you consider it was only in 12 games. A lot of people forget too that he's a former first-round pick, 4th overall. He was picked there for a reason. This guy should rebound nicely and have many solid years ahead of him. Keep an eye on Amari Cooper in terms of the next 5 or 6 years of his career. Number 6 for me on there, I got Josh Gordon. Now this is one, it feels like Josh Gordon's been around forever at this point, but he's still pretty young, and he's actually still in the prime of his career in the NFL. He's only 27. He'll only be 20. Right now he's currently 26, but he'll be 27 for the duration of the season. Now, if you look back in 2013, he only played 14 games at the age of 22. He had 87 catches, 1,646 yards, and 9 TDs. What made that number more amazing, if you consider those numbers, the quarterbacks who were throwing him the ball were Jason Campbell and Brandon Weeden. So when you consider the quarterbacks that he had, the numbers he put up, it was amazing. Now, everyone watched last year to see how would he recover, does he have any of that talent, what's going on here. Well, he showed he had all the skill that made him a top 5 wide receiver in 2013. Now, his numbers were hindered a little bit by the brutal play of Kaiser, but now Kaiser's gone, and they brought up a huge upgrade, Tyrod Taylor, who is, like I said, a huge upgrade over Kaiser in that one. At 6'4", 220 pounds, this guy has all the skills. He has no real weakness in his game. The only concern with him is really his past. Has he overcome the addiction issue? If he's done that, this guy would be actually a lot higher at this point. He's got size, speed, athleticism, hands. Sky's the limit. He actually has a talent to be a top 5 wide receiver. I think another thing that's going to help Josh this year is the addition of Landry. They also signed Hyde, and a lot of people are going to speculate whether or not going to draft Barkley at this point. But you got Coleman, David Njoku, and Landry there. That will keep defense somewhat honest. He should be ahead of Amari Cooper and Juju Smith-Schuster really in terms of the rankings. But the reason why I bumped him down to number 9 is just because of his past issues. I just need to see that he can keep clean for a full offseason before I'm ready to put him up there that high at this point. He should be drafted as a top 10 wide receiver, and easily could be top 5 statistically with Beckham, Hopkins, Brown, and Jones statistically. So, my number 10 guy here is Keenan Allen. Well, during stretch of his career, Keenan has looked amazing at times, but he's had a very difficult time staying healthy and staying on the field. He had a great rookie season, but he took a step back his second year. A lot of people weren't sure what to think of that. Who is really Allen as a wide receiver? Well, then in 2015, in his 3rd year, he only played 7 full games. Once again, struggling to stay healthy, got injured, was gone the second half of the year. But before getting hurt, he was dominant that year. Through the first 4 games, he was on pace to finish the year with 142 catches, 1,577 yards, and 7 TDs. So he looked really good that year. Then he goes into 2016. He only played 1 game before he got hurt, and he was out for the year. But in that game, he looked good. In the first half, he had 6 catches, 63 yards before his season ended. Then last year, he rebounded very nicely. Finished the year with 102 catches, 1,393 yards, and 6 TDs. Really, his strength is as a possession receiver, and that really ups his PPR value. He has good size, 6'2". He's still young, only 26, even though he's entering his 6th NFL season. He's a guy who I would consider high risk and high reward. Can he stay healthy? That's the big question mark. But if he does stay healthy, this guy can put up huge numbers out there for you. Number 11 for me is A.J. Green. A.J. Green's a future Hall of Famer. He has had 1,000 yards receiving every year he's been in the league, except 2016. That year, he only played 10 games before he got injured and was out for the year. But at that point in 2016, before he got injured, he was actually on pace to have his best statistical season of his career. He was actually on pace to get 102 catches, 1,542 yards. Another thing I like about him, he finds the end zone. There's been 3 times in his career where he's had double-digit touchdowns. He's another receiver with great size. In fact, I could see his career finishing very similar to Larry Fitzgerald, where maybe some of those yardage totals drop a little bit, but we see that the catches go up. Once again, very similar there. Is there concerns? Well, this guy's a stud, no doubt. If I have a concern, it's really Andy Dalton's play. Andy Dalton's inconsistent. I think another thing, too, is that the Bengals need to get some other weapons to complement A.J. Green. Right now, he's really the only guy there that I would be concerned with if I was a defense. Remember, 12 guy there is T.Y. Hilton. If a player missed their quarterback last year, T.Y. Hilton missed Andrew Luck. He finished below 1,000 yards receiving. That's the first time he'd done that in a while. Now, he did have some huge games last year that just reminds how talented he could be. During 4 games last year, he had a total of 605 yards, averaging 151 yards receiving in those 4 games. Just once again reminds how good and talented this guy can be in the right situation. Now, before 2017, before the drop-off year without Andrew Luck, he had 4 consecutive seasons with over 1,000 receiving yards. He had his best year in 2016, where he had 91 catches, 1,448 yards. Now, at age 28, he's not considered young anymore, but he's not old. He's still got some prime years ahead of him there. You look at in the NFL. You could have 5 to 6 very productive years ahead of him. Is there any concerns for T.Y. Hilton? Well, the biggest concern, number one, is Andrew Luck's health. And right now, we're not hearing a whole lot in terms of updates. They've been very quiet. Even Andrew Luck said there's a timetable, but he won't reveal to anybody what that timetable is at this point. Also, Indianapolis needs a running game. They need to do a couple things out there, get some other wide receivers. It takes some of the attention away from T.Y. Hilton. But beyond that, he's a very talented and still pretty young wide receiver. Davante Adams comes in for me at number 13. So they released Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson has moved on now. He's in Oakland. And that's kind of a passing of the torch. So right now, Adams becomes the number one wide receiver, the number one option for one of the greatest quarterbacks in the NFL history. In fact, if you look at Aaron Rodgers, he leads all quarterbacks historically with the best quarterback rating of 103.8. In fact, he's the only quarterback in the history of the NFL to have a career quarterback rating of over 100. Now, Jordy Nelson, when he was the number one guy there for Rodgers, he had some huge statistical years. Between 2011 and 2016, Jordy Nelson had 4 seasons with over 1,000 yards receiving. 3 of those years, he had TD totals of 15, 13, and 14. And so those numbers are going to have to go somewhere. Those targets will have to go somewhere. And it appears like the Packers are fine moving on and letting Adams become their number one receiver right there. And the last 2 years, Adams has been a touchdown magnet. He had 10 and 12, and neither one of those years did he finish playing 16 games. In fact, he would have broke 1,000 yards last year if he stayed healthy. The young age of 25 and Rodgers being the number one option. This guy should have many, many huge years ahead. I've got Davante Adams on my number 13. Number 14 there, I've got Allen Robinson. Now, Allen Robinson combined for 153 receptions, 2,283 yards, and 20 touchdowns between 2015 and 2016. If you look at his rookie year there, he was injured often. Oftentimes when he was on the field, he wasn't 100%. He really only played full 8 games as his rookie year where he was healthy. You project that over 16 games, he would have had 1,000 yards as a rookie. When you consider those numbers, that's really quite amazing when you consider that he played it for a bad offense that didn't have a very good quarterback. Now, he's coming off of ACL injury at this point, but everything appears that he's going to be ready for OTAs. He's young at 25. He's 6'3". He has no glaring weaknesses in his game at this point as a receiver. He's the complete package in terms of that. Concerns, really the biggest concern that I have for him at this point for Allen Robinson is the progression and development of Mitch Trubisky at this point. Still a young quarterback, struggled a bit last year, so we'll have to see new head coach there. Hopefully they can turn some things around. The number 15 for me is Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks has had 3 seasons over 1,000 receiving yards. That's solid and consistent. Now, here's the way he's going to be used in the NFL. We see that already. Brandon's going to be used as stretch defenses, not as a possession receiver, which means that Brandon Cook will have lower targets, catches, and TDs. With that said, the former first-round pick is very good and still young at 25, and he's proven that he can produce in the NFL. Or do I have any concerns with Brandon Cooks? One concern I have, he's been traded twice in 2 years. It makes you wonder why teams don't want to sit with this guy for a while. Maybe it's money in the NFL. And another concern I have is now he's been traded to the Rams, is he'll have Cooper Kupp, Woods, and Todd Gurley to compete with targets there. That could affect him a little bit. Number 16, I got Tyreek Hill as my number 16 dynasty wide receiver. The 5'10" speedster was advertised. If you look back to his rookie year, he's kind of advertised as a rookie. He's kind of a gimmick weapon, kind of a Swiss Army knife type of player who can run the ball, return kicks, play wideouts. A lot of people felt like he can do a lot of things, but he won't become a great wide receiver. But he'll have a good impact overall in terms of football. Well, as his rookie year went on, it became clear that he could be a legitimate number 1 or number 2 wide receiver. And so we headed into last year with new expectations. And he followed that with a really good second year. He had 75 catches, 1,183 yards, and 7 TDs in 15 games. So he's a guy that's got a lot of talent. Now he's got the addition of Sammy Watkins there, and I think that's going to help him quite a bit. Sammy Watkins is going to help take away some of that pressure that he had from double teams and safeties cheating over. It provides a nice complement to him. Another thing that's going to help him moving forward is now that Alex Smith is gone, he's going to have Pat Mahomes at quarterback. And Pat Mahomes' legs and ability to extend plays really bodes well for the speedster. I think in terms of how that's going to affect him is very similar to how it affected Watson and Fuller. You look at Will Fuller, very similar wide receiver, got a lot of speed. Well, during the time that Watson was quarterback, Fuller had 7 TDs in 4 games. A lot of times Watson would extend plays, and because of it, allow Fuller to get downfield, to get past the coverage for longer plays. I think you're going to see similar things here too with Tyreek Hill and Mahomes at quarterback. It's very much like Brandon Cooks. I think statistically you're going to see similarities in their careers. that's kind of where he's at in terms of his floor and ceiling. Although still young, he's still got room to develop. He could, I guess, at best, develop into a Steve Smith type player. Still young at 24. Once again, a lot of room to grow in the NFL. I like Tyreek Hill there. Number 17, I got Adam Thielen. Now, Adam Thielen is really a great story. He made the Vikings as an undrafted rookie free agent out of Division II Minnesota State Mankato. He made the team. He was mostly used as special teams. He began to work his butt off. He slowly moved himself into the offense and then began to move himself up the depth chart. The last 2 years, he's averaged 1,121 yards. And he really became the Vikings' #1 option last year, finishing with 91 catches. Having Kirk Cousins there is only going to help him a lot. Do I have concerns for Adam Thielen? Well, one, he's not young anymore. He's not old per se, but he's not young at 28. The other concern I have is Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is a very good wide receiver. Stefon Diggs' concern is that he can't stay healthy, but Stefon Diggs could really move into that #1 role and steal some targets from Adam Thielen at this point. Number 18 for me is Demaryius Thomas. Look at Demaryius Thomas. Thomas had 5 seasons with over 1,000 receiving yards. Last year, he just missed that mark. He ended up with 949 receiving yards. He has had 3 seasons where he had touchdown totals of 10, 11, and 14. Now, those numbers obviously took a huge hit when Peyton Manning retired. But I don't think that's really why we've seen a statistical decline. Obviously, Peyton Manning is a great quarterback, undoubtedly. But I think really what hurt him the most was not necessarily him, but the quarterbacks that replaced Peyton Manning. Look at Osweiler, Trevor Siemian, and Lynch. None of those quarterbacks are good, and so really that hurt him. The addition of Case Keenum should give him a nice rebound year. I expect him to rebound with 1,200 yards, 7 to 8 TDs. 78, yeah, that'd be nice. 7 to 8 TDs. He's very good, but at the age of 30, his best years are behind him. He should stay the team's #1 wide receiver for maybe another 2 to 4 years. He's a guy that's, once again, very talented, but because of his age, got to drop him down a bit. Number 19 for me is Jarvis Landry. Now, Jarvis is a PPR stud at this point, averaging 105 catches the last 3 years, but he has a huge drop-off in standard leagues. Now he's traded to Cleveland. It's going to be interesting to see the effect that Josh Gordon has on him. Here's why I think this is going to how it's going to affect Jarvis Landry. I think having Josh Gordon there playing in Cleveland, what you're going to see an increase in yards. I think he's going to have less double teams. I think Jarvis Landry is going to have a better yardage total, but I think you're going to see a decrease in catches for him. So I think that's how it's going to work itself out. But he's still very young at 25, and it's hard to ignore his numbers at this point. Number 20 for me is Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin, age 30. Now, he is Wilson's favorite target and his most dependable target. 2 years ago, he had 14 touchdowns. That was a huge year. Now Jimmy Graham is gone. He's no longer with Seattle, and Jimmy Graham takes his 10 touchdowns with him. So those touchdowns have to go somewhere. I wouldn't be that surprised to see Doug Baldwin get a few of those. Now, in the last 3 years, Doug Baldwin has averaged per season 1,053 yards and 10 TDs per season. Baldwin's not young anymore, but he still has a few very good years ahead of him. Also, I think this actually bodes well for, if you're a Wilson fan, if you're a Baldwin fan, I think this bodes very well for them. Seattle's lost some players in the offseason. They lost Richardson, Sherman, Bennett on defense, some other players on defense that they lost. So I think what's going to happen is Seattle, to win games, is going to have to depend on Wilson and that offense to score points to win games. That bodes well for Doug Baldwin at this point. So number 21 for me is Stefon Diggs. Now, once again, got to remind you guys, we're talking about dynasty players. Okay, we're not looking at just straight wide receivers heading into 2018. We're looking out 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years ahead. So for me, Stefon Diggs is my number 21 guy. He's 24 years old. Of course, you know the Vikings playoff here, that great play that he made against the Saints. Probably seen that over and over. He has a talent, actually, I think, to be a top 15 wideout. What's held back Stefon Diggs? Why then is he not putting up those sort of numbers that make him top 15 according to my claims? Well, it's really about health of Stefon. If you look back at 2016, his numbers were a little deceiving. And I think it's important to go beyond the numbers and break it down a little bit. He often played hurt that year. He missed a lot of minutes due to injuries. When he was healthy, he was at times amazing and showed that he could be the #1 guy there. During that stretch of games before he got hurt in 2016, he was averaging 10 catches per game and 121 receiving yards. Had he played a full 16 games, he easily breaks 1,000 yards receiving. Last year, he had 8 touchdowns, which is a career high for him. But if you look at his first 3 years in the league, he's missed a lot of game and a lot of time with injuries, so that's the thing. But he's still young at age 24, got a lot of talent. If he can stay healthy, if he can put it all together, now he has Kirk Cousins there. I think this guy's got a pretty high ceiling. Number 22 for me is Alshon Jeffrey. So Alshon Jeffrey gets freed from a bad Chicago offense. He ends up in Philadelphia. He was supposed to rebound with over 1,000 yards. It didn't happen last year. So it's kind of he's becoming a bit of an enigma for me personally. In fact, he actually put up his lowest yardage touchdowns going all the way back to his rookie year, even though he played 16 games. He undoubtedly has talent. I think it's impossible to ignore that. He's had 2 times in his career he's broke over 1,000 yards in a season, and he had 2 more that he was well on pace to do that, except injuries shortened his year. Last year had 9 touchdowns, which obviously is a very solid year for him, not to mention 3 touchdowns in the postseason. He's still in his prime, and he has a ton of talent, and he should be what I would consider a really solid number 2 fantasy receiver. Why is he bumped down then? Well, for me, the concerns that I have is the offense and Carson Wentz. If you really look at them, they love to spread the ball around a lot. I think that's why his numbers were hurt so much. And so I think the fact they like to use their tight ends, running backs, other receivers, I think you're going to see it take a hit. I think he's going to be a very good football player. He's going to be a good receiver. He may not put up great fantasy numbers though. Number 23 for me is Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp, the moment that he arrived at camp, he impressed the coaches. They loved this kid. They thought he was great. And that really carried over into his rookie season. He had a very good rookie campaign with 62 catches, 869 yards, and 5 TDs. And I think that was only in 15 games. Don't quote me on that, though. Coaches love this kid. He's got great work ethic. He really reminds me of Adam Thielen, the Vikings, statistically. The only difference is he's actually ahead of Adam Thielen in terms of his age development, where he's at that same point. One thing that hurts him a little bit is the arrival of Brandon Cooks. Obviously, that's going to take away some of his targets. Number 24 for me is Sammy Watkins. It's easy to forget that this guy was a former first-round, 4th overall pick. Now, the first 2 years he's in Buffalo, he looked poised to be an all-pro, which is really significant when you consider the fact that he played not on a great offense, he only played for an average quarterback. Well, he really had a fall off. Last year he got traded to the Rams, and that kind of hurt him because it took him a while to learn the playbook, so he was already behind the curve there. And then he ended up playing behind Woods, Kupp, and Gurley in terms of targets, but now he's in Kansas City. And I think this is huge for him because he's going to be their possession receiver with Tyreek Hill really being their deep threat there. He's very talented. He's got a young quarterback, Mahomes, throwing him the ball. At age 25, with his talent and opportunity, we think he's going to rebound nicely and could have a great 5 or 6 more years ahead of him. My number 25 guy is Will Fuller. Some people may be surprised, but don't forget about this guy. Don't sleep on him. Many forget that his rookie year started off great. He had a great preseason. The coaches loved him. They talked about his impact. He comes out, and in the first 4 games, he had 2 games of over 100 yards of receiving, and he had 2 touchdowns, right? But then he got injured, and plus you have to remember the quarterback that was throwing the ball was Brock Osweiler. That slowed his year, so his statistics weren't that great. But last year, when he was healthy and he came back, and Deshaun Watson was back at quarterback, he had 7 touchdowns over 4 games. They were beginning to build rapport. In fact, the game that Watson got hurt and was out for the year, they actually began to build rapport, had his most targets, has most catches and yards. It's looking really good. This guy's young at 24, former first-round pick, has elite speed. Another thing that bodes really well for him is DeAndre Hopkins there. So once again, he's going to see a lot of one-on-one coverage because, let's be honest, teams are going to focus on Hopkins. That's going to leave Fuller out there in coverage quite often. I think this is a great situation. Last year's success was not an anomaly. He's a great athlete. He has a strong arm quarterback, Watson. He could easily be top 20 wide receiver. This guy could easily break 1,200 yards and 10 TDs, and that would be very easily attainable for Fuller if he can stay healthy next year. Number 26 is Dez Bryant, age 29. It's been 4 seasons this guy has had a really good year. It really is. It's been a while since he's really had a huge year. The thing is, though, is back then, you go back 4 years, he didn't just have good years. He actually had some great years. There was a point that he was phenomenal. In fact, from 2012 to 2014, he had 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, and he was averaging 14 touchdowns per season. Now at 29, there's still time for him to turn things around. Although I have to say that I'm not seeing anything that's indicated that he's going to have a major turnaround at this point. But once again, you can't ignore him. He's got Dak Prescott. He's still relatively young, and he's had some successful years in the NFL, so you got to keep him on your radar. Number 27 for me is Devin Funchess. They traded Kelvin Benjamin away last year, and he took over as number 1 wide receiver. In the first 4 games as the number 1 wide receiver, he actually looked really good. He looked like the number 1 guy, but then he had a shoulder injury, and that really kind of hurt him moving forward. He still finished with 8 touchdowns. He's got great size, 6'4", 225 pounds. He's a guy that I think is going to have a nice career moving forward. Another guy I like out there, Sterling Shepard, 25 years old. He's a very good wide receiver who shined last year at different times in some very difficult situations. He had 3 games in which he had numbers of 7 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown. He had another game of 11 catches, 142 yards. In another game, he had 11 catches, 139 yards, and a TD. He only played 11 games last year. Had he played 16, he easily breaks 1,000 yards for the year and 80 catches. And all this when really last year he was playing in a bad offense. Eli Manning struggled. He saw the #1 quarterback. A lot of times he was double teamed because Beckham and Marshall were out. Sterling Shepard is a very solid, young, talented wide receiver. Number 29 out there is Robbie Anderson, 25 years old. This guy could be actually a lot higher up on the list here. He looked great at times last year. During a 6-game stretch, he had 3 games of over 100 yards, and he had 6 touchdowns during that 6-game stretch. He looked poised to become a legitimate #1 wide receiver. But he's had a very tumultuous offseason. He's been in trouble with the law. He's done some things that don't bode well at this point. So, guy you got to keep an eye on. But here's the thing. A lot of people might be scared by his the field conduct. He might slip. You might get him as a late steal. Got a lot of talent. Hopefully he can get his head on straight there. Number 38 for me is Marvin Jones, I should say. Since coming over to Detroit, he's really blossomed for Detroit there. Him and Stafford have built rapport. Last year, he eclipsed 1,000 yards, had 9 TDs. I see no reason for that trend not to continue at this point. Now, once again, we talked about this. Once the draft happens, these things are going to change. Once guys get to camp, we look at injuries, other things like that. But here's where we sit in early April. A few other names that you may want to consider out there as far as young wide receivers that have a bright possible future. One guy out there is Kenny Galladay of Detroit. Last year had some big games. He looked very talented. Concern I have right now is slot receiver Tate is there. Jones, we just talked about, is rising to the top. So I think that Kenny Galladay is still a year away from being a great receiver. Another guy out there is Josh Doctson of Washington. This guy's another one, a former first-round pick. His rookie year, he missed a lot of time for injuries. Last year, he was hurt again. But there were times last year where he began to start to show signs that he could become a legitimate #1 guy. So you need to keep an eye on him, watch his progress. Another guy out there is Nelson Aguilar, or look at Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder is only 25. A lot of people, myself included, thought last year he was going to really move into that #1 role. He just didn't move into that. Now, first 8 games, he really struggled. Second 8 games, he looked a lot better. Here's what I think about Jamison Crowder. He's a slot receiver that has a high floor but a low ceiling. I think he's going to have a very good NFL career, but I don't think he's ever going to become a great wide receiver at this point. Another guy out there to keep your eye on is Randall Cobb. He's not young anymore at 28. But now that they've traded away Jordy Nelson, Cobb becomes the #2 guy. Really is going to move into Adams' role there in terms of targets. This is a guy, Cobb, back in 2014 had a huge season. Back in 2014, Cobb had 91 catches, 1,287 yards, and 12 TDs. So he's another guy that could rebound nicely. Another guy out there to keep an eye on, who's been, I think, a big disappointment, but maybe this is the year he breaks out, is Devontae Parker. He's been disappointed, but now Jarvis Landry is gone, and coaches say they still feel like this guy's got the talent out there to be a #1 guy, so keep an eye on him. You got D.D. Westbrook looked good for Jacksonville last year, although there's a few guys out there. They got Cole. You still got Marquez Lee. Kelvin Benjamin. Let's talk about him briefly. Kelvin Benjamin's 29. A lot of people like this guy. I've never been a huge fan. I think last year we kind of talked him down a bit, told you to kind of stay away from him. Honestly, I don't expect a big year from him. I think that at best he could become a decent #2 wideout at the most. I don't expect a huge year. Another guy out there is Cameron Meredith at 25. He actually looked good last year. We did another video. We talked about him on comeback players or players that could have a big season last year. We gave a bigger statistical breakdown of this guy, but he looked really good at moments. Looked like he could become a legitimate wide receiver. Something interesting happened a couple days ago. New Orleans actually signed him to a 5-year tender. Now he's a restricted free agent, so Chicago has an opportunity to match that. If they don't, he goes to New Orleans and becomes the #2 guy there. With Drew Brees throwing him the ball, he could have a huge year. So anyways, that's our top 30 dynasty wide receivers moving into the 2018 season prior to the NFL draft. Getting excited. Football is right around the corner. Thanks for joining us. Get the word out there. Subscribe. Get the word out. Look for new material. Take care.